Anvils. They suck. Conceptually, they aren't bad. I think they're a pretty great thing to have, actually. But the way that they're implemented is just plain stupid. From insane level costs to simply rename an item, to being unable to do anything with an item, they're absolutely terrible. So let's talk about it. So we all know Anvils cost levels to use, because if you didn't, then I told you. But how does it determine how many levels you need? Well, it depends on what you're doing. Renaming an item always costs one additional level. This may seem odd to some of you at first, but I'll explain later. If you're repairing an item, it simply costs one level per material used to repair. So using 2 iron ingots to repair an iron pickaxe will cost 2 levels. If you're repairing an item using another item of the same type, such as 2 diamond shovels, it costs 2 levels. Combining enchantments is a bit more complicated, so bear with me. I'll use the example of adding this book to this sword. If an enchantment cannot be added to an item, it's ignored and adds 0 to the level cost, so the protection on the book can be ignored. If an enchantment can be added to an item, but isn't compatible with enchantments already on the item, then it adds 1 to the level cost per incompatible enchantment, so the Smite 2 adds 1 to the level cost. If an enchantment can be added to an item, the additional level cost is the final level of the item multiplied by a certain multiplier. Each enchantment has a different multiplier, but the Minecraft wiki has a table that has every multiplier for both combining 2 of an equipment and combining equipment with a book, which I'll leave in the description. So the Unbreaking 2 will combine to make Unbreaking 3 and cost an additional 3 times 1 level, so an additional 3 levels. So in total there will need to be an additional 4 levels needed due to the book. It's important to note that adding enchantments only applies to Java. In Bedrock, you instead multiply the difference between the initial and final level by the multiplier. So instead, you subtract the 2 from Unbreaking 2 from the 3 in Unbreaking 3 to make 1. So it would only cost an additional 1 level for Unbreaking 3, and in total it would only cost an additional 2 levels due to the book. The way that levels work are a bit complicated, but overall wouldn't be anything too bad. I mean, it doesn't seem like you need an overly insane amount of levels to do anything, right? Every time you do something to an item in an anvil aside from renaming, it gains 1 additional anvil use. If you're combining 2 items with anvil uses, it takes the higher number of uses and adds 1 use to the final product. So adding a sword with 2 anvil uses to a book with 4 anvil uses would result in a sword with 5 anvil uses. This takes us to the prior use penalty. The prior use penalty is an additional level cost on top of whatever the level cost would have been before. How does it figure that out? Just with this funny little equation. That's an exponent, by the way. If you fail math class, it doesn't mean you multiply the first number by the second number. That's how many times you multiply the first number by itself. So what this means for us is that you multiply 2 by itself however many times as the item has anvil uses. So a sword with 3 anvil uses would have a penalty of 2 times 2 times 2, or 8. Sorry, 7. That minus 1 really helps. If you don't know exponents, they rack up very quickly. Don't believe me? Well, if that sword instead had 5 anvil uses, that would be an additional 31 levels, which is over 4 times the amount of an item with 3 uses. This is the main reason why anvils cost a ridiculous amount of levels to use. And remember, every level costs more than the last, so you'll actually want to be as close to the level cost as possible so you don't waste levels. This is already stupid, but experience farms make it manageable. Not fun, but manageable. But we can't have that, can we? If doing something in an anvil would cost 40 or more levels, the game does something special. It stops it. Completely. You cannot do anything with the item in an anvil anymore, including renaming because of the prior use penalty. This means that an item with 6 anvil uses can never be used in an anvil again, because the prior use penalty is 63, and as shocking as it may be, 63 is a larger number than 39, so it's too expensive. Actually, I lied. There is a way to use the item in an anvil again, by resetting the anvil use counter. How do you do that? Either repair it in the crafting grid, or put it through a grindstone. Except this resets all the enchantments on it, so you're back to square one. Why is this a mechanic? Well, the only thing I was able to find from my admittedly short research was in a forum post from 2012 that claims the intention is that you can't have an infinite use tool as this would be unbalanced. The addition of mending 4 years later would make this irrelevant. Mending has some mixed opinions, but regardless about how you feel about the enchantment, it doesn't make sense to add this arbitrary restriction in a sandbox game. All this does is make players need a whole chart to be able to max out the enchantments on their gear. So, how do we fix this abomination of a mechanic? I think it's pretty simple, really. Obviously, if it's too imbalanced, it can be tweaked, but I'll throw the idea out there anyways. First off, remove the level cap. It's unnecessary. If people really want to spend the levels for it, then why should they be stopped? Now, prior use penalty. My initial thought was to just add the number of anvil uses to the level cost, but that may be a bit too broken. So, let's just replace the exponent with multiplication and remove the -1. This means that instead of an item with 5 uses costing an additional 31 levels, it would only cost an additional 10 levels. Much more reasonable. And if that ends up being too cheap, then we can just change up this funny number here. So, there's my thoughts about anvils. You may disagree, and that's perfectly fine. That's what free thought is for after all. Anyways, if you enjoyed this video, cool. Glad I can make your day at least a little bit better. Bye.